Welcome guys, this is the Great War Western Front, and here are my pro tips. Supply is important, but global supply is not the thing that you want to be using. If you buy global supply, this is a one-time use supply. Once you've used it, it's gone. Now if you spent your cash buying air wings or tanks, these provide permanent supply that recurs every single time you use the air wings. So unlike global supply, which is a one-time use, these are recurring. So one air wing can provide 100 supply every single time you use it. So even if you don't deploy these air wings in battle, you can use them simply as just the supply drops basically. So if you want extra supply, just buy air wings. On the strategic map, you want to concentrate your forces into DOOMSTACKS. So you place a thin line across the majority of the front, just enough to hold the defense. And then with all of the stacks that are left over, concentrate them into DOOMSTACKS. Now there's two different ways to approach this. You can concentrate your DOOMSTACKS into DOOMSTACKS of infantry, and concentrate your DOOMSTACKS into DOOMSTACKS of air wings or tanks. Now the benefit for each of these, and the reason that you use them, if you concentrate a DOOMSTACK of infantry, the enemy will try to match the amount of infantry, or as close as they can. So it basically pulls all of the enemy corps away from the rest of the front line and towards where your DOOMSTACK is. So you can use this to manipulate where the enemy corps are going. The other way, if you concentrate on air wings but have a very small infantry force, as long as your infantry is enough to win the battle, the air wings will provide the firepower and the supply to actually carry the battle out. So as you can see here, we have a DOOMSTACK of planes with very few infantry, and they have left only one corps over here, so it's very easy to take. Where over here we have a DOOMSTACK of infantry which has pulled all of the enemy corps all over from the rest of the front line, trying to defend against this DOOMSTACK of infantry. So the best time to use this DOOMSTACK of infantry is when you're surrounded by as many enemy hexes as possible. And then obviously, if you're going to use a DOOMSTACK of planes, make sure that it's not connected to the DOOMSTACK of infantry, so you can actually attack where they're weak. Following on from the last tip, to take advantage of infantry DOOMSTACKS pulling all of the enemy corps away from the front line, what you want to do is to try and extend the enemy front line more than you're extending your own. So before we took Longwy, Verdun was occupying 1, 2, 3, 4. By taking Longwy, we are extending our line by 1 hex, but we're extending the enemy defences by 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So try to find opportunities where you're going to extend the enemy lines further than you're extending your own. You can then place the DOOMSTACKS in these territories that are surrounded by the most enemy territories, and this will occupy the most enemy troops with the least amount of your own required. If possible, try to encircle your enemy. Now you don't need to fully encircle the whole of 1 hex. All you need to do is make sure it's not connected to the enemy capital. Capital being Krusnak or Paris, depending on which side you're playing. Once you have encircled an enemy, each turn they are going to lose 1 star. It says here, region surrounded. The region is surrounded by regions controlled by the enemy. While surrounded, you cannot attack out of the region and cannot move units into or out of the region. The region will lose 1 star per turn while surrounded. If all stars are lost, the region will be captured by the enemy. You must be able to trace a line of friendly regions from the command region to the region to break the surrounded state. So, because these two are cut off from the enemy capital, each time you end turn, these are going to lose 1 star. As you saw there, they lose a star. And you don't even need to finish off these territories. They will just completely evaporate, disband, and you will take them without even needing to fight. And, as you see, the territories are now ours. It is a good idea to use this tactic against enemy territories which have a huge star amount. So rather than actually taking the territory, which will require many battles, if you can manage to encircle it or just cut it off from the enemy capital somehow, then you will gradually take that territory without needing to fight. Now I assume, I have not tested this, but I assume if we just cut a line all the way up here, that will encircle all of these territories. So you could take entire swaths of enemy territory just by taking a few territories out. Artillery is vital. Make sure you take enough of it. If you're going to storm some trenches, you want to make sure that you pin down, suppress everybody within shooting range. So if you want to try and take these 2 trenches, you need to suppress all 4 of these, and preferably all of these. Right at the back, potentially, might be able to shoot, but it's unlikely. So we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 artillery, really. You could somehow manage to get away with 4 if you put this artillery here rather than spread it between 2. But I advise taking between 4 and 6 artillery into every deployment. 6 is the better option in my opinion. So you can have 6 artillery with about 10 infantry to attack with, which then leaves 14 infantry to defend with. When assaulting trenches, don't take too many infantry on each attack. Just take enough to be able to occupy the first few trenches. So here, for example, if you took, say, 10 infantry, the majority of them are not going to be able to get into the trenches. And so, by the time your artillery has worn off, the men that are still not in trenches are all just going to get slaughtered, and it's just a waste of men. So just plan on managing to get into the first couple of trenches. If there was another trench line here, then you'd obviously take 6 infantry to get in each one of the 3 trenches. But if you try to run over trenches that have your men already in, they can't run past. So if you get 2 infantry in here and 2 in here, and then you have 2 behind and 2 behind that want to try and get into this trench line and this trench line, they won't actually pass. They'll just reach this trench line and stand above it, shooting into the trench, which means that they're now standing in the open, and as soon as the artillery's worn off, these 4 infantry are just going to get slaughtered. So just take a look at the enemy defences, see what the closest trench lines are, and just take enough infantry to fill the closest trench lines. Trees are a fantastic place to stage an attack from, as you're hidden when you're in the trees. So enemy artillery won't shoot at you when you're in the trees. If you're heading towards the trees, they will aim in the trees because that's where your path is heading. But if you're actually in the trees already, they're not going to fire at you. And quite often, you can get closer to the enemy trenches by getting into the trees first. So if these trench lines were closer to the trees, or if these trees were closer to the trench lines, we could get within spitting distance before we actually get into the trenches. So always look for opportunities where there are some trees near the enemy trench lines to minimize the distance required to actually reach the enemy trenches. Column formation provides the best speed of movement. So although skirmish formation might seem tempting because you take less damage, if you're standing in the open, it's pretty much irrelevant whether you're in skirmish formation or column formation. You're going to get slaughtered regardless of which you're in. So if you're assaulting a trench line, you may as well stick to column formation because you're going to reach the trench line faster. Now, the only thing you need to worry about when in column formation is enemy artillery. As long as you have all of the enemy pinned down, suppressed with your own artillery, then your only danger is enemy artillery. So when advancing in column formation, just make sure you keep your eye on your men so they don't get walking into enemy artillery on the way to the trenches. If you do set a load of artillery going and run forward and the enemy place an artillery right in front of you, just retreat back, wait for your own artillery to reload and then try again. If you use light artillery, they will reload much quicker than the enemy heavy artillery, so you should be able to retreat and reload faster than the enemy can reload and shoot you. Before attacking a trench line, weaken the enemy forces that are in the trenches that you're about to attack. So you can do this with either harassment planes, or you can do this with heavy artillery. So both of them work just fine. It's entirely up to you which one you want to use. But if you attack without weakening the enemy, by the time you've killed the enemy that are in the trenches, your units will have taken a lot of damage. If you weaken them first before you attack, then you can take these trenches with very minimal losses, which will leave you in good stead for advancing through the trench line. Use your heavy artillery to take out the enemy balloons as fast as you can. As soon as you know where they are, just zero in on them with your heavy artillery. It doesn't take long to actually destroy these balloons with heavy artillery, so just get it done at the start of the battle before you actually make any attacks. Now, to actually hit the car that's attached to the balloon, it's just to the left of where the balloon is. So if the balloon is there, just aim slightly to the left. So you don't need vision to be able to destroy the balloons. So you can fire into the fog of war. You can actually see where enemy balloons and enemy artillery are. In the mini-map, they will show up as a square. So you can't see the artillery at first, but once the artillery fire, they will then be shown, even if they're in the fog of war, they will then be shown on the mini-map as a square, so you know where they are.
Set positions.
So you can use light artillery as well if you want, just to speed up the process. But obviously light artillery is a bit weaker, and as we see, we've destroyed the balloon. Now, looking up here is a good way to see if you destroy things. So obviously with the balloon we get the visual, but with other things like MG emplacements and artillery emplacements, if they're in the fog of war, we can't actually see them, but we can still see if we've destroyed stuff by having the points pop up here. Sometimes the enemy trenches are too far away for your obs balloons to see, and especially during blizzards, your obs balloons have a very short range. So in these cases, it can quite often be a good idea to send a scout forward, just a single unit, just to see where the enemy is, where the enemy NGs are, and if you see any emplacements like artillery and balloons and such. This type of intel, you will lose this unit by doing this, but this type of intel can save you a lot of troops because you will know exactly, as you can see here, we can actually see where the MG nests are now. So we now know if we're going to make an attack that we're going to put an artillery attack here and here before we actually send our troops in. This type of intel will save you a lot of troops, and it will only cost you one man, or one unit, sorry, to actually find this intel out. So it's worth throwing away a single unit for that extra intel. If you get the opportunity, try to approach trenches from the side. Trenches can only shoot efficiently forwards and backwards. They don't shoot very well sideways, or even at all sometimes. So this is especially helpful in areas that are too far away for you to be able to hit with artillery. So when you can't suppress, the best thing for you to do is to try and flank and approach from the side. As you can see, we've been able to get really close to these trenches without hardly getting shot at. Also, if you can get behind MG emplacements, that's also a good idea as well. So try to approach from the side on the trenches and from behind on MG nests. So to actually get this to work, you're going to need to spearhead the enemy. So the best thing to do is attack down the flanks, so you can then get behind the enemy backlines and the side of the trenches. If you manage to spearhead down to the backlines, you're going to be outside of the enemy artillery arc. So this artillery here won't be able to fire at you as you advance or stand in the open. So make a spearhead into the back lines and approach from the side in the corner. For army composition, what I like to do is have 6 artillery. You can take a mix of heavy and light if you want. Obviously they do different jobs. So have 6 artillery and approximately 10 units to attack with. This is going to leave you with 14 infantry to fill the trenches and defend with. So 10 to attack with, 14 to defend with 6 for your artillery. Don't link up your trench lines, or at least not in the rows. So have rows of trenches that are all linked, but don't link the rows together. This way, if the enemy want to advance from this trench or this trench line to this trench line, they have to cross some open space to do so. This means that you can have multiple banks of defences. This is most important in defence missions, obviously not quite so important when you're on the attack, but having a nice gap between trench lines is a much better way than linking them up, which will then obviously make your entire trench system vulnerable. If all of these were linked, if they managed to get into this front line, they could travel through the trenches without getting shot at all the way to your command centre. So having lines is fine, but don't link the lines together. Only ever put one infantry into each trench. This way, if you need to move infantry around, you don't have a blockage in the trench and infantry can move all the way through. If you had 2 infantry in one trench, say here, this infantry would not be able to pass, and so it would end up leaving the trench line. So now, with only 1 infantry in each trench, we can now move this infantry anywhere we want, and it won't leave the trench line. So at the moment, this infantry is under artillery attack, so we can now safely move it to a different trench without leaving the trench line. Here we have another one under attack, which we can now safely move over to a different trench line. And as you can see, this is going to preserve a lot of life. Once the artillery has died down, you can then move your infantry back over and occupy the trench again, so you're not causing any blockades. If you're heavily outnumbered on defense, don't be afraid to just abandon some of the control points. Sometimes it's safer to just concentrate all of your forces all in one area around your command trench. This way, because you're heavily outnumbered, you'll have a lot more guns facing the oncoming enemy, and it's going to be very, very difficult for them to overwhelm you. Where if we tried to spread all of our troops out amongst each of the control points, then we would only have 1/3 of the amount in each area rather than 3 times the amount all in one area. So finally, a couple of cheese strats, which I don't necessarily recommend using, but I thought I'd mention them just because I may as well. You might want to do cheese strats. So one is, if a control point is being contested, the timer pauses. So say for example, if we took Y and then we were taking X and we were running out of time to be able to reach the final objective, what you could do is contest it until it gets close to filling up, and then move your unit away so it decontests for a while. This will keep the timer paused, and then you can move the infantry back in to contest it until it gets 3/4 of the way or whatever you want, and then move your infantry back out again. This will essentially pause the battle indefinitely. There's a bit of micromanagement involved, obviously, but if you want to delay the battle timer, this is one way to do it. Another thing to mention as well is the contested timer fills up faster the more troops you have taking it over, and that also applies to if you're taking it over with a weakened unit. So if one of your units has only got a fraction of health, it will fill up the timer a lot slower than a single unit which is full health. So you could leave a damaged unit to contest the timer, and then this will buy you plenty of time while you start to move your troops over to the final objective. And then if you want to use the cheese strat and move back out, by all means you can do. Right, next up on the cheese strat menu, we have the battle honours system. So basically, I just attacked with a single infantry against an enemy stack of 6, I think it was. And I didn't fire a single shot, I didn't leave the trenches. And although we take a -5 penalty to the national will up here, we actually gain 5 and 4 down here. So we get a net gain of 4 national will. Now, the enemy are getting a net gain of 10 national will, so they still get 6 more than us. But this is one way to, well, in the least, prolong the campaign, which is awesome. But also, if you really, really need the national will, then it's a way to gain 4 national will. But also, it cost 100 supply to stage the attack, and I got 200 supply back, so I also got a net gain of 100 supply. Now, you do need to let the battle timer run for a while. I'm not sure what the cutoff is, but if you try to cease fire too early, you don't get any battle honours. So you'll just have to do some testing yourself to see what the cutoff time is. It might be 5 minutes, might be 10 minutes. I'm not 100% sure. So I've just checked, and apparently you have to let the battle timer run for 2 minutes. So as long as the battle timer runs for 2 minutes before you cease fire, you will get these battle honours. But this is one cheese strat that you can use to get some extra national will and to get some extra supplies. So, following on from that last cheese strat, you can combine this for other purposes as well, not just for getting the battle honours. So, for one thing, you can do this just to prevent the enemy from gaining a star. If you've knocked them down a star and you don't want them to recover it, and it doesn't cost you any gold because you're not attacking. Another thing, you can actually use artillery and planes and stuff to do free damage to the enemy. So even though you're not advancing with your infantry, you can still use your free supply from your units rather than your global supply. So you can get some free damage off. And also, a pretty key thing for this strat is if you combine it with an actual assault, and you do this before your proper assault, you'll be knocking down their battle morale for each time you do this on a territory. So if you have a territory surrounded by, let's say, 3 hexes, one of them is the hex that you've got your proper attack going to be coming in from. The other 2 are lightly armoured, or armed I should say. You can still go in and not actually do any fighting, just to reduce the enemy by 15 morale for each attack. So you can reduce them by 30 morale before you do your proper attack. It doesn't cost you anything because you get your battle honours from doing it. You can do some free damage with long range attacks with artillery and planes, and you weaken them ready for your proper assault, as well as obviously prevent them from getting the stars back. So it's a full-on cheese assault. Right, yeah, so that is everything. I think I've covered everything that I know anyway. I might end up discovering some more things later on down the line. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope it's been helpful. If you would be so kind to drop a like and maybe subscribe, I'll be playing an elite difficulty campaign for each nation, and we'll see if we can use some of these strats ourselves. So cheers for watching, guys, take care, and I shall see you soon.